Welcome everyone to Next Level Humans podcast. I have Dr. John Demartini here. He's a dear friend, also a teacher and mentor I have learned a lot from. He's an amazing human being. And welcome, John.
Thank you for having me on your show there. It's been fantastic. Looking forward to
Yeah,
it.
thanks for being here. And also, I know you're very busy, so your schedule fully packed, I know. And thanks for giving us an hour of your time today. Why don't we start with your story, because your story is a pretty amazing story, starting from your childhood and um, I would say awakening to your mission and calling, connecting with your calling.
I had learning challenges as a child. I was told in first grade that I would not be able to read, not be able to write effectively, not communicate effectively, not go very far, and probably not amount to much. I had a speech impediment as a child and had to go to a speech pathologist at a year and a half. And I made it through elementary school with the help of the smartest kids. So I loved hanging out with smart kids because they could give me insights by listening that would help me sort of pass school. That worked really well until I was 12. My parents moved from Houston, Texas to Richmond, Texas at 12. And we lived in a small little town with about 9,000 people, and it was a really low socioeconomic area. Didn't have any smart kids per se, and I didn't have anybody to get information from them. So I ended up failing in school, and I dropped out. I left home at 13 and lived on the streets really from that point on. At 14, I decided that schooling wasn't going to be my thing. I was going to go surfing because I picked up surfing along the way. And I hitchhiked to California and down into Mexico. And then at 15, I panhandled enough money to be able to fly to Hawaii. So I ended up living on the north shore of Oahu where the good waves were. And I became a big wave rider gradually, riding bigger and bigger waves until I nearly died at 17. And in the recovery of that, I was led to a health food store and to a yoga class. And at the yoga class, I met a great speaker and teacher named Paul Bragg, who inspired me one night with his speech to believe that maybe I could overcome my learning problems and someday be able to read and write properly and become intelligent. Up until that point, I never thought I'd be academically intelligent. I thought I'd be good at surfing. That's about it. So I started on a new journey right at 17, almost 18. And that put me on a new trajectory. And I tried to go back. I left Hawaii, flew to LA, hitchhiked back to Texas, and tried to go back to school. I failed at first and almost gave up on the dream about doing what I do today, which is traveling the world and teaching. And after failing, my mom said to me, whether you become a great teacher and travel the world, or whether you go back to Hawaii and ride big waves, or you return to the streets and panhandle as a beggar, I just want to let you know that your father and I are going to love you no matter what, because they knew I had learning problems. And when she said that, I got this determination, this feeling like there's no turning back. And I said to myself, I'm going to master this thing called reading, studying, and learning. I'm going to master this thing called teaching, healing, and philosophy. And I'm going to do whatever it takes, travel whatever distance, and pay whatever price to give my service of love across the planet. And I hugged my mom and I went into my room and I got a dictionary out and I made a commitment to memorizing and understanding and pronouncing 30 new words a day. And over the next couple of years, I accumulated 20,000 words. And from the bottom of the class, I was now at the top of the class. So I really worked extremely hard. I mean, I was studying at least 18 to 20 hours a day. Once I was learning how to read, I just was thirsty to want to learn as much as I could. Anything and everything. When I was about to turn 19, halfway through that journey, my mom asked me what do I want for my birthday and for Christmas, which are the holidays. And I said, Mom, I want the greatest teachings on the face of the earth, the greatest writings from the greatest minds who ever lived from around the world. And she said, Are you sure you don't want just a T-shirt or something? And I said, No, I want I want the greatest ideas by the greatest minds. So she didn't know what to do. She called her brother, who is a professor at MIT, which I called Uncle Ralph. And he, with this amazing gift, how and what he did to accumulate, I don't know, but he had a flatbed truck come down to our home with two 6 by 6 by 6 foot wooden crates with thousands of books in it. And I opened these crates up with a crowbar and brought these books into my room and filled my room with these books and just lived basically reading and doing yoga and studying and reading all day long. If I wasn't going to school, I was in front of a book. And slowly but surely, students gathered. My first student, I was 18. I had a 375-pound Afro-American woman ask me to teach her yoga. I wasn't a yogi, but I was learning yoga. So she wanted me to teach her. I said, okay. I was so inspired to have somebody want to learn from me that it was like, wow. And then I had another guy ask me to teach a meditation. And then I had 17 people come into a library while I was studying and say, can you teach us what you're learning? And my teaching career began. By the time I went to the University of Houston, after these first 2 years at a junior college, I used to go under the trees and do yoga under the trees and meditate. And lo and behold, people gathered and started asking questions. I was kind of a weirdo because not everybody was into yoga and at the time, back in 70, early 70s. So they gather and I'd have 100, 125, 150, sometimes 400 people gathered around in a semicircle around, and I would just answer questions. And my speaking career just kept growing. When I went on to professional school to become a doc, I I taught every single night, at least 6 or 7 nights a week. I was teaching, and I started charging, and I think I made $100,000 when I was 23 years old teaching, which was a lot of money in those days. And I never stopped. I gradually got opportunities to speak around the city, and then I got different cities in the state of Texas, and then I finally got opportunity to speak on a conference, and I started going around to different states. And then by 1980, I think three, I had my first, or 83 or 84, I did my first Canadian speech. And then by about late 80s, early 90s, I started doing things in Europe, and it just kept growing. Now I've been blessed to do presentations in 160 countries. And
Yeah,
I
lovely.
I still teach every day.
Yeah, you
You
still
and
you
I
still
are
read, study, and teach.
we're like brothers and sisters. We love
Yeah,
information, inspire and transform lives.
yeah,
And I have not. There's nothing I love more than that. I mean, this is the fifth interview I've done today, and I did 2 days at Breakthrough this weekend, and tomorrow I've got about four of them, and I've got a live presentation. I do every single day. I get to speak almost, and so I love
yeah.
doing it.
We both love speaking. I can see that. The reason why I think this is your story is a very inspirational story is because I think we're living in a era where the young generation, they're so distracted from who they are, their mission and their purpose, their priorities, that life is tough. And I find myself usually teaching my students that an easy life is an easy path, or what people call luck, is just someone who is very much deeply dedicated and on a mission. When you
Yes,
find your mission, when you find your big why, when you find your big purpose, everything falls into place, and things just grow and expand naturally. So I think your story is kind of like a great example for that, because you just loved studying and reading and learning and loved teaching, and everything just happened naturally. I mean, the way you tell your story, it's like I have a similar story. It just happens naturally, and I
yes,
think this is a big message to give, especially to the young generation, to the people who are like yesterday. I had a workshop and I met a young girl, and she's been speaking about, and her words, what was able to catch in her words was she was speaking with I have tos and I must and I shoulds and all that, and she was speaking about 22 years old, how all doors were closing on her face, and nobody wanted to listen to her, or nobody wanted to work with her, and she was devastated and she was depressed and all that, just because she's not on a purpose or on a mission, or she's not
Exactly.
naturally connected with herself.
You said it perfectly. Whenever you hear yourself saying, I've got to, I have to, I must, I should, I'm ought to, supposed to, and I need to, you're dealing with an injected set of values from some outside authority that you're put on a pedestal, and you're trying to be somebody you're not, and you're trying to envy and imitate other people and being second at being somebody else instead of first at being you. The moment you're doing something that's truly inspiring, that's truly meaningful, that is something that is you can't wait to get up in the morning and do, it's a different game. Because now you build incremental momentum into an unstoppable freight train of opportunities. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, everybody wants to get on the train with you and ride the train.
Yeah, you do become unstoppable. My most of my students right now and the people I'm supporting are entrepreneurs, people who want to grow their businesses, startup entrepreneurs, founders, but also business owners. And I usually talk about how to become unstoppable, and it is with finding your deepest mission and deepest purpose. But also, the other thing is, I think, having a clear mind and transforming the episodic memories, and the method you developed, the Martini method, I think is a game changer as well. And I wanna talk a little bit about that, because every time I practice this method, I have practiced a lot of methods. I have met amazing teachers, not so amazing teachers, some methods, not so amazing methods, and I have been on a self mastery path personally, first of all, for over 25 years. And every time I work with Demartini method, I am more and more in love with the method and how it works and how amazing and how brilliant. It's just genius. About how that journey was for you, because it's such a advanced but also simple, scientifically backed, amazing system. I want to go back to the days you started developing the Martini method, and how it evolved, and you know.
When I was 18 years old and I received, just turning 19, when I received those books from my uncle, one of the books was The Discourse on Metaphysics by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, or Leibniz. And in there, on the very first paragraph, literally, in the first chapter, he said that no human being could ever improve upon what is. But human beings project what ought to be as a perfection instead of what is. And they tend to put this idea that I know what would be ideal more than what's magnificent already is. And I, for some reason, that really brought a tear to my eye. And whenever we get a gamma synchronicity, eureka moment, tear in the eye, it's deeply meaningful and it's a confirmation of a moment of authenticity. And I just knew that I knew at that moment that I want to know what this perfection is, as he called it. Nobody could improve upon this perfection because there was a depth of understanding that even Candide, that was written by Voltaire, he was satiring Leibniz's awareness. And I had a sense that Leibniz had a deeper awareness than even Voltaire. Voltaire was caught in dogma and moral hypocrisies and belief systems, but this was really a step above. So when I did that, I said, okay, I want to understand the order, the hidden order in the apparent chaos. Then came another book there from my uncle called the Principles of Quantum Mechanics by Paul Dirac, Nobel Prize winner. And in there, he talked about particles and antiparticles and joining them and returning to light. And I was young, I was 18, turning 19, and I thought, I wonder what would happen if you took positive and negative emotions and put them together at the same time. Could you make enlightenment? It was really a naive kind of a fantasy at the time, I thought. But it seemed like that would be cool. And then Paul Dirac also said that it's not that we know so much, it's that we know so much that isn't so. There's a lot of misinformation to the masses. And to the master has to be able to distill that, syncretize, and synthesize these pairs of opposites and awareness and opinions out there and come to something that more transcendent. So anyway, when I did that, I kept my eyes open on any information that might, give rise to that awareness. Then I came across a book by Albert Einstein, and Albert Einstein wrote a book on Brownian movement, which is seemingly random movement that you find in just water out of a ditch. The particulate matter just moves around in some sort of random motion. But what he did is he filtered out the randomness and he got it down to one particulate matter that you could perceive. And he followed it and he found a pattern of order to it. And then he filtered it where there were two and he had a pattern of order and he could calculate it. And then he allowed three and he calculated. And there's a thing called factorials that says that anytime you add a new little particulate matter into it, the complexity grows by factorials. So 1 is simple, 2 is twice, 3 is 6 times, because it's 3 times 2 times 1. 4 is 24 times, 5 is 120 times, 6 is 720 times. So as you get more particulate matter, the computational complexity becomes more difficult. And as a result of that difficulty, we eventually reach a point where we think, well, that's just random. We can't figure it out. We don't have the algorithm in our brain or in our computers to be able to figure it out. So we call it random. Now, Boltzmann, who is another Ludwig Boltzmann, who is a student of thermodynamics, said he never was satisfied with the idea of randomness. And he always believed that it was a boundary of our computational skills. Then Stephen Wolfram recently said the same thing. In information theory, he said, disorder and randomness is nothing but missing information. If we could recover that information, we could find the hidden order in the chaos. Well, that is what I wanted to do. I wanted to find out, how do we uncover the hidden order in apparent chaos? And I realized that anytime we are emotionally charged, we're infatuated with somebody and we're conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downside. The unconscious is the information that's missing, the ignorance. And if we're resentful, we're cognizant of the downside, but we're unconscious of the upside. And whatever we're unconscious is the information that's missing. So I thought the reason why we have perceptions of disorder and emotional disorders and psychological disorders is a lack of information. So I thought, okay, the quality of our lives are based on the quality of the questions we ask, and questions make unconscious information conscious. So I thought I will develop a system using questions to make people conscious of unconscious information to be able to discover the hidden order in the apparent chaos. And if so, we could then uncover the perfection that is there that we can't see because of our limited computation and because of our moral biases that we get trapped in from the misinformation, as Paul Dirac said. So that led me to first wanting to know the positive and negative judges we have on people. Because if we know that we take a magnet, we can't separate the positive and negative. Within, just like the yin yang symbol, within the yin is the yang, within the yang is the yin. And so if you find a trait you label negative, it's not negative, it's neutral, but you've chosen to see only the negatives, not the positives. So if I ask questions, what's the benefits to that and what's the upside to that, I can actually balance the equation and see nothing missing. So first thing I did is I made a list of all the positive and negative traits or judgments we had on an individual or on ourselves. And I made an exhaustive list. And first I made sure people balanced it. So if they saw for every negative, there was a positive. Because if you see more negatives than positives, you're going to resent the person, avoid them. If you see more positive and negatives, you're going to seek them and you like them. But if you actually see both of them, you're going to love them. And you're going to be fully aware of both sides of them. And there's no one-sided person. We're always heroes and villains. We always have two sides. So our first stage of the Demartini method to help find a hidden order was to simply evaluate people, find out what we thought was negative and positive, whatever the ratio was, balance it by finding the other parts that were missing. So there was nothing missing in the awareness of both sides to see both poles of the magnet. That was the first step, because that way we would have a more balanced view of somebody instead of a skewed seeking or avoiding impulse instinct response. Then I realized that all the traits that we labeled good or bad the things we think are terrible, a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years later, we're not thinking it's terrible. We find the blessing in it. So why have the wisdom of the ages with the aging process when you can have the wisdom of the ages without it? By just looking right now, what are the upsides to that? And I found out there are no positive and negative traits out there. There's just traits. So I said, okay, now we've listed all the positive negatives we see on somebody. They're still our subjective illusion. Let's go find the upsides to the things we think are down, and let's find the downside to things that are up, and let's balance them. And the moment we did, and I used to have people do 150 traits on people and then balance them in numbers and then balance the positive and negatives in each number and see the benefits and drawbacks. The moment they did, they had tears of gratitude for the person. And I thought, okay, we're on to something. We're taking the pairs of opposites and bringing them together, and there's a form of enlightenment, a form of a deeper awareness. And then I realized that whatever we judged in other people was us. We only resented people on the outside that represent parts of us on the inside that we're ashamed of, that we're too proud to admit we have, that we've dissociated from, and we're projecting it. And they're reminding us of it. And we're angry at them because they're reminding us of what we're judging in ourselves. And the same thing in reverse on the things we admired. So then I realized, let's go and have reflective awareness and let's find out where we do the same things. And I basically started asking questions. Where and when do I display and demonstrate the same behavior I'm judging in them that I thought was positive or negative initially, but now I've neutralized? But where do I have that? Because once it's neutral, I don't have a resistance owning it.
Yeah.
But I did have a resistance once I thought it was positive or negative, or I wanted to have it or I didn't want it.
Yeah.
So I kept bipolarizing myself instead of synthesizing myself in the process. But once I got through that, not only did I have a deeper appreciation, but I felt my heart literally open and I had tears of gratitude. And I started to realize that this person's quite magnificent. And there's a hidden order in these people. And I chose not to see it because of my bias. And my subjective bias was interfering with my love. My chaos was interfering with the hidden order. And then I started realizing, well, if I have those traits and I'm judging them and I've just neutralized them, if I don't neutralize my own judgment on myself, I'll recreate them. So then I added another step to it and I started going, okay, when we did the behavior that we thought were positive or negative, where is the benefit to the thing we thought was negative that we felt ashamed of? What was the drawback to the thing we thought we were proud of? And balance that out. So now we're neutral because if we're proud, we're inauthentic. If we're shamed, we're inauthentic. But if we're neutral, we get to be ourselves. And we all want to be loved for who we are. So then I basically neutralize that. And now I've neutralized my perceptions of others. So now there's reflective awareness and equity between myself and others. Now there's equanimity within myself. I'm not proud or shamed. I'm now authentic. And I'm feeling a state of grace. I'm feeling an awareness, and I'm getting tears of inspiration, a sign of authenticity. And we all want to be loved for that. And so here we are now experiencing that. And this is a methodical, step-by-step, kind of a scientific, you can measure the charge, you can neutralize it. I mean, it's something duplicatable and reproducible. So it's a science. Then I started to realize that, wait a minute now, I've now taken a trait that I'm perceiving. I thought it was negative or positive. I now found the positive or negative to balance it. I found out where I've done it. But then I've now still got a label that they're mostly that behavior. And I had to make sure that I balanced all the behaviors relative to each other. So I took, if I thought that they were very verbally critical, I had to find out where were they verbally praising the same person. So I then went in there and I started asking, where did they do the exact opposite behavior from what I've labeled them? So I'm fully aware of the individual. And I realize that they're just a human being living with a set of values. And if I do things that support their values, they can be nice. If I do things that challenge their values, they can be mean. Mm-hmm. And once I balanced that out, I realized that the labels I had on this person, always this way or always that way, or never do this or never do that, disappeared. And then I realized that they're just a human being with a unique set of values. And if I find out what those values are and I care enough to communicate in those values, I can get any response that I want from people. And the labels disappear and the judgments on them soften. Then I discovered about 25 years ago, and then those first 5 little sections that I just mentioned were part of the method for many years. But then about 25 years ago, 25 years ago, I was writing a book on the origin of life. And I wrote a big textbook, 2-volume textbook on theories about the origin of life, from uh, panspermic theories to, biological theories on the planet to all different types.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden I had this aha. I had information that I'd had all the way back into my 20s, but for some reason I overlooked it. And suddenly I'm getting this insight in my late 40s or mid 40s. I'm getting this insight that there's redox reactions, which is they call it oxidation reduction. And chemistry, you never have an oxidation without a reduction. Well, an oxidation reduction is a gain and loss of electrons, basically. And what's interesting, um, I realized that they're both going on. And I then started to stop and I would think, wait a minute now. When you get challenged by something that you resent, you activate the sympathetic nervous system, which oxidizes. And when you get something that supports your values, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system that reduces. And if they can't be separated, that means that our perceptions of challenging and supporting must be simultaneous. They must be simultaneously going on. And an aha went on, and I started to experiment. At the very moment I perceived a trade, I stopped and got present with it. And I looked at where was the exact opposite being displayed. And I made a discovery, which I call the greatest discovery I've ever made. The discovery that there is no one-sided events. The only reason we have one-sided events is because we have filtered our reality and we've become conscious of part and unconscious of the other. But if we become fully conscious and really mindful, we can actually see the pair of opposites simultaneously. And the moment we do, the labels dissolve, the judgment dissolves. We realize that there's some sort of intelligence in the universe making sure that we always get a balance of support and challenge to maximize our growth, which is a profound principle and now makes the yin yang symbol make sense. And since inhalation activates the sympathetic nervous system and exhalation affects the parasympathetic nervous system, one speeds up, one slows down the heart rates, etc., and raises and lowers blood sugar. That meant that if you could balance the breath and you balance the mind and you balance the chemistry, you'd balance the state of perceptions. So I realized how the ancient yogis had been doing the breathing process, and it's a very key element. And I know how important the breathing is with you. Uh, the breathing was part of this. And then all of a sudden, I noticed people when they were elated, their breathing was long inhalation, short exhalations. And when they were depressed, they were long exhalation, short inhalations. And I saw the autonomic responses. And then I realized if I could ask the question to balance out the perceptions, I could change the breathing, I could change the redox reactions, I could change the chemistry, I could change blood sugar, I could change epigenetic of impact and physiology and symptomatology. And I realized we have something here that's not only helping psychology, but we're also now helping heal the body. So this was very profound. But then I had one more realization. I realized that the reason why we resented people and judged people negatively is because we were comparing them to a fantasy of the opposite. So in other words, if we're infatuated with somebody that is positive and supportive, then we're going to resent the person as negative and challenging, and vice versa. So I then added another part of the equation to it. I started asking, at the moment they did this behavior that you judged negatively and you resented, that represented the sympathetic and oxidized you, at that moment, if they had done exactly the opposite moment, what would have been the drawback? And then when I cracked the fantasy, their resentment to the behavior disappeared. And when I cracked the nightmare on the things they infatuated with, the opposite, they all of a sudden were no longer infatuated or resentful. And then I realized that transcended indifference and helped people really open their heart to love and realize the beauty and the perfection which Leibniz was talking about. And so the long thing I worked for from the time I was 18 to try to find a way of seeing the perfection, the hidden order, I have now a science that's now allowing me to get access to this. And it transcends the dialectic by Zeno and Hegel, and it allows people to actually get into a synthesis and synchronicity of all opposites and awareness, and allow them to get what Immanuel Kant would describe as the transcendent state of awareness. And it's profound. And I kept adding more to that after that. I started to realize some really amazing things. I found out that when somebody's criticizing you, They're criticizing you about something you did in the past or something you're about to do in the future. So that meant if they're criticizing about the past and they're concentrating on the past, and it's causing a oxidation, in order to have a reduction, somebody has to be entangled in order to make the present. So that means somebody must be supporting you about what you're about to do in the future to balance the past. And I found out there was a temporal entanglement inside human behavior that was mind blowing. And when I figured that out, I started to realize that now we have some degree of predictability of why do people show up in our life to do the things they do at the time they do it. And that was really profound. And it gave another tier of inspiration to people when they got that awareness. But then I realized there can't be spatial entanglement, temporal entanglement without spatial entanglement. And so another insight came. And then I started to actually go into the moment when I was being criticized or praised or rejected or accepted or lied to and told the truth, whatever the pair of opposites was. I started asking, where exactly are they located in a egocentric and geocentric positioning? And we found out a Nobel Prize was given because of the awareness of this in 2016. And so I basically put that and imposed on that. And I found out that when somebody is criticizing us, there's somebody praising us, but they're either 180 degrees opposite of each other. And if somebody's confronting us, there's somebody got our back. And if somebody's to the side, there's somebody to the opposite side, forward, backward, whatever. And there were vectors that were actually spatially oriented, and that it wasn't a random event virtually or in reality what was going on in our life. There was a temporal equilibrium and a spatial equilibrium. And that was a very profound realization. I then realized something that Maupertuis had said and Mach had said. Maupertuis was a French mathematician, and he coined the idea of the law of most efficiency, or the law of least action. He said that everything that goes on in the universe is actually the most efficient, but when we judge it with an incomplete awareness, we don't recognize it. And I found a way of acknowledging that principle now in psychology to help people. That's why when people do the method, when they're done, they realize there's nothing to change in them relative to others. There's nothing to change in others relative to them. There's just an awe, seeing the hidden order, the implicate order, as David Bohm describes. And all of a sudden, they're just sitting in awe and realizing there's a perfection right now. And now we have access to this perfection. And I then realized that we also build ourselves up when we think we're building constructively, and beat ourselves up when we're feeling we're destructive. So there's a conservation of energy and matter. So I said, then that means that all of our building and destroying has to be simultaneous. Our mitosis and our apoptosis and our cells do this. Our oxidation reduction do it. Our anabolism, catabolism have to have a metabolic equilibrium. So that meant that we have to be able to, in order to calm down our prides and uplift our shames, we have to be able to be aware that we're transformers, not builders or destroyers. And evolution, not revolution, is transformation. And so then I realized that we're all just transformers, nothing to take credit or blame for, just something to participate in the magnificent transformation that we contribute in a participatory universe as we walk through our days.
Yeah.
But anyway, there were more and more insights that just kept coming along. I found out that
It's
all the
deepening.
traits we had in our life became conserved. I realized that we never gained or lose a trait. So many people are trying to get rid of half of themselves and get only one side, and they think that it's missing. And I now show them that it's not missing. Nothing's missing in you. And I show them that you're not going to get rid of anything or gain anything. All you're going to do is transform things. And so there's more and more insights that just kept coming on it as the method developed, and led to a more profound rabbit hole of investigation into
Yeah.
this, the power of the human psyche and the human experience.
Yeah, it's such a I think it's triggering kind of like a deep level of thinking and a deep level of understanding. And the most amazing thing is all kinds of people from all around the world meet with the method at different consciousness or awareness levels, and they still can benefit, or they can work from where they are. Like in my
Exactly.
journey, I started meditation at a very early age, and I realized, I think we're kind of like interested in the same thing, just seeing the divine order and seeing the perfection or connecting with love. So my thing was, at a very early age, I got that if I waited long enough, I have been able to see reality. It's kind of like my journey was, I realized no matter who I judged, how I judged myself or the other, or the distorted perceptions, if I waited enough and if I was eager to see what is there, it happened naturally. So that's why my method has been meditation for many years, and then it evolved to breath work. And when I met Demartini method, I was like, the first time I came to the breakthrough experience, because I was a teacher, I had tens of thousands of students already, and I kind of like had this method of, okay, if I wait long enough, I will be able to see reality. And it was happening like the neutralization or whatever happening by, naturally. And when I met the Martini method, it was kind of like at one level, I started thinking, wow, this is how my mind works. It was also kind of like
Exactly.
understanding the puzzle of how the mind works. So I was like, wow, now I understand why, if I waited long enough, it just it just was happening by
You,
itself, because this is how that works.
you're
Kind of
saying
like
something really profound.
if you take a step back, and if you're truly really eager to see, it's kind of like this idea of I want to see, I would like to see, I would love to see. It's just only see, no matter what, and then it happens naturally. And then I was like, at my first breakthrough experience, I was like, wow, this is why it was happening the way it was happening. This is how
Well, that's so
the mind
true.
works.
What you're saying is so true because um, we have in our amygdala, the amygdala assigns valency, which is emotional charge to events. And the amygdala is a survival, deep nuclear area of the brain. And so when we have things that challenge us, for instance, that represents predator, anything that challenges our values represents a predator to our brain, or anything that supports our values represents a prey. We create impulses towards or instincts away from things as a survival response to not lose food and not to be eaten. But when we're in our highest values and we're living where we're in the cortical area of the brain, we are more objective and neutral and not reactive. We're proactive, not reactive. We have foresight, not hindsight. So the second we have a subjective biased interpretation of reality, we activate our amygdala and we assign charge to it, and we have an emotion and we emotionally react before we think. And we're basically in survival. The moment we're back in our executive center, we're now centered and we can see objectively both sides. And our intuition is the returning to seeing both sides from our subjective misinterpretations of reality. So if you meditate long enough and get quiet and calm the mind, your intuition will bring homeostasis back into the neurology and allow you to see things objectively without an attachment. Attachments are things that you infatuate with or resent that have intrusive thoughts and occupy your mind and space. So what's interesting is that meditation allows the intuition to strengthen, allows you to come into the center and transcend the perceptions of judgment. You're not reacting, you're now proacting. And now you're clear, your mind's clear. The Demartini method is nothing more than the meditation process, methodically and cognitively done to neutralize the noise to assure that you get that outcome. So a great meditator can get that outcome. But if the meditator doesn't see the pairs of opposites, the second they come out of the meditation, they can have the same reaction to the judgment. So this is a way of neutralizing the judgment. So there's no judgment in the first place. And in conjunction with meditation, it can be sped up and you can use the tools together, as with breathing, meditation, and this tool. They all dovetail each other. Anything that has stood the test of time that's worked is not going to be interfered with on these same principles because the principles are going to be sound
Yeah, the
principles.
the the interesting thing is, but I mean, I have been able to personally see the perfect order, and I have been with meditation, with, like you said, with my deep intuition, like kind of like know what is real. But with Demartini method, it kind of like gave me the ability to go deeper into the thought process and kind of like see what that's all about. So it's kind of like looking at this with meditation. My experience was looking at this beautiful painting, and just beautiful, and being wow, and being grateful for it. But with Demartini method, that's why I say, like, even though you start at that level, even though you have some awareness, it's kind of like gave me the ability to look at every little detail in the painting, and then kind of like get the message at a deeper level and learn from the painting itself. So it's kind of like gave me the ability to look at life on a more detailed way, and kind of like, this is what this is, and that's what this is, and kind of like really going in close and seeing the little bits of the puzzle, because I had the
You know,
ability to see the whole. That wasn't what I was, looking for with meditation. I had the ability. So I have some friends, they're like, okay, I see the perfection, but it's not it. It's kind of like there is a deeper message there. And the method, the Martini method, allows me to, go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then there is all kinds of creative ideas popping out just because I have been in that thought process. And that's what the method allows me to do, like go deeper into a thought process and just go deeper into that puzzle, so that I can have more and more and more creative ideas, and just understand it on a deeper level, which is kind of like, which is like what I got from what I am
and I
still getting from the method.
one time I had the opportunity to go to a um, masterpiece painting perform. Well, it was a display of some masterpieces in paintings at a museum, and it was a private showing because they don't. I mean, you don't. Sometimes you just kind of walk by, but you don't actually get background on it. And there was a gentleman who is a somebody who restores masterpieces that are
Mm.
deteriorated, and he did something that was mind blowing. He showed the actual brushstrokes in the sequence in which the painting was done. And then he found out that each of the brushstrokes were matching a musical pattern. And so we got to figure out what he did is he figured out what was the music in the mind, either at the time playing or in the mind of the artist as they were doing it by the brushstrokes. Because they were in a cadence according to some music. It was mind blowing. Never even remotely thought of something like that. And he showed us, and he took us through the sequence of brush strokes. And while he played the
Wow.
music that was behind the scenes, and he was following the music on the brush strokes and showing us the
Yeah.
painting. And you realize that there was not only a presence and a consciousness in the painting that made it something masterful, but there was a transcendent state in the mind of the painter as it was being painted. Really amazing to watch this, and something I never even remotely constructed until I actually listened and watched him show the sequence of the painting strokes.
Yeah, I think the Martini method allows me to see that. It's like
Exactly.
allowing
That's
to
why I was using
deepen.
that metaphor.
Yeah, and also like listening to a live orchestra, and just listening to it and being in the music, or just also listening to every bit of it, like the violin or the cello or all
Oh,
of
yeah.
them, like it's allowing me to go deeper. So I do suggest at any level, I think anyone can practice the Martini method, and they are going to go deeper and deeper and deeper, no matter on what level they are. So I have a question. I have been wondering, and I have been wanting to ask you, which is, what do you think is the motivation behind people's judgments and like distorted perceptions? Like, what is the like why, or what's the motivation behind, like, why do humans tend to s- like look at life and just be one-sided, just look at one side? What's the motivation there? Like, what are they? Because like even in the mind, there is no action or there is no behavior without a motivation. So there must be a motivation, or there must be a reason why humans tend to look at this perfect painting and just want to see one side of it.
Thousands of years ago, when we were supposedly nomadic, more nomadic, before we started to work in groups, we were generalist, and each fended for themselves and lived more isolated and had to survive. Slowly but surely, when people would run into other people, they realized that different people had different skills and talents. And when they started living in families and kinships, and then townships, and eventually communities, and then cities, and it kept growing in numbers, um, the individual trades began. I'm now building a chair. I'm now building a house. I'm now planting. I'm now weaving. And as specialties emerged, we became more independent, but also dependent. We became independent from the generality, but dependent on everybody else to do the rest. And this is the beginning of economics, because we had to have some sort of monetary system to be able to have a sustainable fair exchange. So we had to build a market. But what that meant is that we have to do our service, our unique service, come to the market, sell it, and to get all the other services that we needed to survive. So people, they're dependent on other people. And the pecking order became, if you grew tomatoes and you want to build a house, the builder of the house would be charging way more than a person of a bushel of tomatoes. So a pecking order became on who is more valuable to society and less valuable to society, and that people depended on. When they did, this social pecking order occurs. In 2016, they found Nobel Prize winners, they got a Nobel Prize for it, finding out how the place cells and the grid cells in the hippocampus and the entorhinal complex in the brain create a social pecking order and create a looking up to people or down on people, distance or close to people, the orientation of how that works and why we judge people. So this evolvement of a social structure came with a social hierarchy, which started the judgment system. And then we found out that whenever we compared ourselves with somebody that we perceived more valuable or less valuable, we would distort, because we would fear the loss of something more valuable and fear the gain of something less valuable, and we would distort and create these distortions. Wilhelm Wundt in 1897, in his book on psychology, talked about the law of contrast. So if you take a beaker of water that's 40 degrees, a beaker of water that's 72 degrees, and a beaker of water that's 140 degrees, and stick thermometers in there, you get an objective reading. And if you put your hand into the cold water, you could probably guess that's about 40 degrees. You put your hand in the tepid water, you go, that's about room temperature. Put your head in the hot water, you go, ooh, that's hot, about 140 degrees. But if you put your hand into the cold water and leave it there and let your hand get cold, and immediately take it out and put it in the tepid water, you will think it's 90, 95 degrees because of a law of comparison. If you put your hand into the hot water, 140, and then put it in the tepid water, you'll think it's 40 degrees or 50 degrees. So the second we make a comparison to other people that we put above or below us, we distort our interpretations, because one represents prey and one represents predator, and we create an extension and an accentuation of our perceptions to survive, because we got to run after the prey and run away from the predator. So we distort our reality and we start to judge. So the more social structure became, the more social hierarchy and the more judgments came, and the more the fear of loss of that which we're seeking and the fear of gain of what we're trying to avoid shows up in life. And the more we end up having to depend on economics to be able to stabilize that, to have sustainable fair exchange. So people are frightened of being rejected by people they depend on, because that means banishment out into society. And today we're so specialist that we can't survive on our own out there. If in fact, we have movies and shows out there now on how to survive in the wild, and we drop them off for a week and they have to survive, and they can barely do it because we're not accustomed to that anymore. So
No.
our social structure emerged automatically with social hierarchies, and we create judgments and distortions, And now we lose contact because the second we exaggerate somebody, we minimize ourselves. Second we minimize somebody, we exaggerate ourselves. And this judgments distort who we are. And that distortion leaves us uncertain, and it leaves us vulnerable. And we get into our amygdala as a survival mechanism because of it. And that's one of the reasons why we have these distorted views about ourselves until somebody comes along and shows how to level the playing field. I call it owning the traits of the greats.
Yeah.
If you can see that whatever you see in other people, you have in your own form and level the playing field, you can take subjective biased interpretations of reality and make them more objective and now start to see the hidden order again. That's what the method is for.
Yeah. So the big why is just it just happens because of the social experience. It is like how the social experience
We're a
evolved. It's
social
just,
animal.
yeah,
We're a social
it
animal,
just
and we,
happened.
as a result of it, we've created social structures. We can't all be CEOs of a company. There has to be
Yeah,
somebody that works at
yeah,
the factory and somebody that works in the management and
yeah,
somebody that works at the top with the vision and planning. So the more cognitive we go, the more we go up the scale. And the
yeah,
more emotive we go down, the more we go down the scale. That's been
yeah,
shown. And that's why people with left-brained analysis typically have more economic development than people that are more are the artistics, because they're basically not able to do the technological advancement to give them a competitive advantage.
yeah. And that brings us to the conclusion that not everyone will be interested in self-mastery. You need a level of,
Some
not
are in
need, but it's
survival.
a level of, like, this is a necessity, some level of mind, some level of IQ.
Many people are living in survival. Most people are in
Yeah,
survival.
yeah. Thank you very much, John. I again appreciated every moment of our conversation. You are coming to London in, I guess, less than a month now, and in November, if
Yes, in November.
yeah,
In November, I'm
yeah.
coming
So
back to
if
London.
you enjoyed listening to Dr. John Demartini, and if you are interested in Demartini method, which amazes me every time, it's just love at first sight for me. Yeah, make sure you check his website, and he will be in London next month at a very special event, the Breakthrough Experience. It's just, yeah, naturally amazing.
I just got to finish one here in Sydney, Australia. I'm
Yeah.
I'm on my ship in right at the Sydney Circular Quay Harbor, right outside the window here. And I just finished it. And there was so many amazing transformations. I mean, I must have had 20, 30 tear-jerking moments watching people's transformations. I mean, there was a woman there that came there that did not talk to her sister for 18 years. And
Wow.
she wanted to run out of the program because she knew that if she kept doing the exercise, she was going to end up appreciating and loving her own sister. And she wanted to be right instead of love. And
Yeah.
so she was fighting it. So I went out there and I brought her back in. She went out and just kind of escaped for a minute, brought her back in. I said, let's take it methodically. Let's just follow the process. And she ended up loving her sister. Well, there was a lady there that she picked as a surrogate to be able to communicate what she wanted to say to her sister, who had an issue with her sister. And it was one of those, the synchronicities that occur. So the very issue that this woman had with her sister, the very sister, this other woman, which represented the sister, had the very issue
Yeah.
with what this person had. And they met in the chairs, and it was just a synchronous moment. And they just actually just cried, and there was tears of gratitude on anybody who was listening in on this whole thing. And then when she got through, the lady looked literally 5 to 10 years younger. I mean, she just took all this stress off her because she was pretending to hate her sister, because she wanted to be right. But the truth is, deep inside, we all want to love. And
Yeah.
we sometimes wait to our deathbed before we get to the truth of that. We get caught in trivia instead of seeing the profoundness of what we're really about. And so that's why I love doing the breakthrough experience. I love helping people navigate through their illusions and their judgments and their baggage and get down to the purest element of who they are and get to love themselves and other people, which liberates them to empower the areas of their life that they want. And it's very,
Yeah.
very inspiring to watch. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm
It
definitely
is.
looking forward to going to London and do it again.
It is.
When
It
I get
is.
into it, I go all day
Yeah.
long on it.
Yeah, I've been using the method, as you know, for some time now in my own retreats and courses. It just works amazing every time, and it's very inspiring to watch what's happening. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you very
Uh,
much. Thanks for being you,
Thank you.
and thanks for your time. Thanks for listeners to our listeners. Thank you for listening and being here. And I'll see you next time.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bye, John. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.